PDF and Parshas Ekev for Lekutai Torah. So the pasuk says like this. So talking about Eretz Yisrael, so it says that Eretz Yisrael is a land of mountains and valleys, and it says Limtar Hashemayim Tishtamayim. From the rain of heaven you should drink water. The Alter Rebbe is going to ask like this. It says Lahavin Masha Kosiv Limtar. Why does it say Limtar to the rain? It should say Kimimtar Havalamem. It should say from the rain, not to the rain. So he explains like this. Second, it says like this. It says the pasuk says like this. Ki Betzalel Elikim asa esa Adam. Man was made in God's image. Pirsh Tselem, Utsura, a Tselem is a Tsura as an image, boiletes, that protrudes outwards. Shekshmat fisimba, nase shoikeya. So if you're going to take a stamp that protrudes outwards and you push it, let's say, into a hot wax, it's going to create an image that goes inwards. Kamavor Gabri Ritzu Shal Tefillin, like it says with regard to the Tefillin Shal Rosh, that the Tefillin Shal Rosh, right? The Rosh, the Tefillin protrudes outwards. Shukachoisem HaMisapich, that it's like a opposite, creates an opposite stamp effect. So meaning to say is that Hashem stamps within us. So really a stamp should have an effect of protruding inwards. And instead this protrudes outwards. That means if the stamp goes inwards, so then if you put wax that has an inward carve, so then you push the stamp into the wax, then it creates an image going outwards. That's called a choisem hamisapich, an opposite kind of stamp, which it creates something that protrudes outwards. But it goes either way. Either the stamp protrudes inwards, and it creates a hard wax of something that goes outwards. But if the stamp itself protrudes outwards, then it creates the opposite. It creates a image that goes inwards. And the Alter Rebbe is going to explain that's the difference between mountains and valley. So he says, "Mi small shomayla nasi min lamata." If God goes small, if God is going to the left, meaning going inwards, it's a way of gevura. So creates right outwards. Everything is the opposite. The Rebbe explains like this. What does this mean? We're going to see an amazing idea in Avodas Hashem. The pasuk says in Divrei Yomim, L'cha Hashem Hagdula, that to God is greatness. Hu midas chazdoi. This is the attribute of God's kindness. Sheba migdulasai, that comes from God's greatness. I mean, to say that chesed is an expression of God's greatness, benepechulamata, and the opposite is we find it below, meaning to say by people. So Hashem, an expression of chesed, is an expression of greatness. Who is the great person of chesed? Avram is the person of chesed. So Avram Avinu alav shalom, our father Avram, it says, "V'anechi ofer ve'efer," that I'm like earth and ash. Meaning it's an expression of bittul. This that Avram is giving from his own life to others. He's not giving extras. He's not saying, what do I have excess of? And then if I have something extra, I'm going to give it to someone else. This is the attribute of Yishmael. Yishmael is a chesed that has an agenda. So an agenda by definition is that if I have something, so I have to get. What can I gain from it? So if I'm losing something, totally losing, then it's not something I'm interested in. But if I have something to gain from it, then it's a chesed of Yishmael. But by Avram, it's not like that. Says Avram Avinu paid his bills on his way back, but until then it was things that he was lacking. That it says that a person's, that I was quoting ideas, that says that your life comes first is only about essentials, but something that is beyond essentials, you're giving, even if it's for yourself, you're giving it away for others. And where does this come from that Avram Avinu has the attribute to be giving to others, even something that's for him? He makes himself secondary. That's like water. Where does water gather? Water gathers in the valley. So you have, but the Alter Rebbe is saying is an idea over here, is that, hi Lorraine, so the Alter Rebbe is saying an idea over here, that the idea of a choisem, a stamp creates an image. If God is protruding outwards, which is gedula, so the opposite is of us, the opposite is in us is the feeling of bittul, of humility. So Avram Avinu is chesed of this world. And therefore his chesed expresses the bittul, the self-nullification in Avram. And that's why mayim, water, which is an expression of chesed, gathers in low places, in the valley. Nimsa. The same expression of God's greatness creates in a person that the person who wants to be chesed, kindness, is the chesed of ma. Ma is the expression, ma means what? What does what mean? What means bittul? What am I? Like Moshe Rabbeinu says, V'nachnu ma, we're what? We're nothing. Shu bittul liyos meis ma'asmei kishurayim. That Avram Avinu places himself as secondary. This is the idea of valleys and mountains. Valleys and mountains. Eretz Yisrael, he's saying, Eretz Yisrael, the pasuk says, Eretz Yisrael is a land. It's a single land. It's made up of mountains and valleys. So if mountains and valleys meet, where there's a mountain, there's a valley. So if Hashem is protruding outwards, Hashem's chesed goes outwards. So it creates within us a that we want to emulate Hashem's kindness is by us. It creates a humility, and therefore the chesed, which is water, can gather in low places, which is the valley. Now he's going to explain what this means in a person's service of God. Meaning to say, so chesed in general, the Avram Avinu shows us that when Avram Avinu says, and he says, I'm nothing. I'm anochi alpha v'efer. I'm like dust and ash. And therefore, his chesed comes from a true place, not of making himself a larger person or something that he benefits from, but Avram Avinu's love and kindness to people is by making himself secondary, that everyone else comes first, and therefore he goes and he's ready to do a favor for anyone. And therefore, God's chesed gathers in such a place where a person makes protrudes inward, so then you're allowing for God to express himself. You can't go both ways. You can't express yourself and say, I want to express outwards. So God says, fine, if you want to express outwards, then I'm gonna go inwards, because it's like mountains and valleys. If someone's a mountain, so God has to create himself to be lahavdil, a valley, to make space, so to say, lahavdil for this person. So this is how he's going to explain it in avodas Hashem, that there's two types of avodas. There's the avodah of bittul, and there's the avodah of love. Love is an expression. So if a person is loving outwards, so God goes inwards. When God goes inwards, and then you're limited to how much, it's all about how much you're creating the rules of the game, so to say. The love is all about you and all about your limitations. So God responds, and it's a limited response. Whereas if you go inwards, then there's no limit to how much of God's infinite kindness one could, you're making space for as much as God's kindness that could be in this world. They say like this, when a person has love for Hashem, like a fire, it's a love, it's a passion, a love of fire. It's just like the natural desire of fire is to go upwards, the sharsha in its root. So too, and the souls of the Jewish people want to go upwards and leave their limitations and leave their body and go towards Hashem. This is the idea of mistalek. You're leaving yourself. So if the person wants to go Haishan, page 21, middle of the M'amar. So we're talking about valleys and mountains. That in general, that Hashem is one of the two. If a person's a mountain, then God becomes a valley. If a person's a valley, then it makes space for God to be a mountain. So Avram Avinu, God's chesed, for example, is an expression of gedul, of greatness. Therefore, Avram Avinu's feeling towards that is bittul. That's why he says, I'm ash or dirt. And therefore, he makes himself a valley, like where the water gathers. So too, chesed is water. He makes space for God's chesed. So, but if a person wants to have a feeling of fire is the opposite of water, and that's an expression. And a person's feeling is to go out of their body and to go towards God. So then he says, that's mismol shalamayla nasi milamata. So if God goes inwards, so then he's sort of say making space. If that's what you want, and he's making space for you to express outwards. And that's what the pasuk says.
What paragraph are you in?
We're on page 21 on the right hand side. And we're just about to start.
I just clicked on the thing and it says page 242.
You're definitely looking on the wrong space. It should be page 21. It's Parshas Ekev.
Well,
Maybe
I
you're
don't
looking at the, you're
know.
looking at the
This is the email I have.
you're looking at the Thursday email.
Oh, where is the Sundays one?
You should have gotten it on a few hours ago.
The latest one I have is the Thursday, I guess. That's the one I just opened.
I'll send it to you again.
Okay, thanks. Sorry.
Hold on.
And you say it's page 21?
Page 21, yeah. I just sent it to you now.
Okay.
So the pasuk says Eretz, that Eretz Yisrael is a land of Harim Uvkais, a land of mountains and valleys. Meaning to say, it's not just that there's it's also a person. A person themselves goes through cycles. Sometimes you're mountain, sometimes you're valley. Ubisirusa dilatata inilfikach, and it's all about a person who has to create an awakening from below. The fikachim beis b'chinas shemayim. There's two types. A person is a land, and a person has to create an awakening, an avoda within themselves. And either you can create an avoda of mayim, which is making a space, like a valley that makes space for the water to go, or you're expressing outwards. You're making like you're expressive like fire, which is going out, means either like water that's going inwards. So you're making space for the water, you're making a valley, or you're like a mountain of fire that's going outwards. And he explains like this: Ki eretz hi knesses Yisrael. The eretz is the. Did you get the email, Shana?
I have the email. What
Yes,
paragraph?
page 21, right-hand side, and the second to last paragraph on the right-hand side.
Okay, thanks.
So it says, Pirshki Eretz Knesset Yisrael. When we say Eretz, we're talking about the Jewish people. Yesh Bahar, and there's some people that are like mountains. Their whole service of Hashem is outwards, is yearning towards God. Sometimes we find that Avram is called the mountains. What the Alter Rebbe is saying over here in the footnote is that we say that Avram is sometimes a mountain and sometimes he's a valley. He says, well, I'm nothing. So it depends on the person. Also, the person goes through cycles of avodas. Sometimes you're a land made up of different, just like a land has mountains and valleys. You don't have one land that's all valleys and one land that's all mountains. If there's mountains, there's valleys. You can have a flat land, but you can't have a land that's all valleys. It's either a land of flat or is a land that's made up of mountains and valleys. So the God tells Avram, Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Jewish people, Eretz Yisrael is such a land. There's different types of avodas. There's different times of avodas within yourself. Sometimes Avram Avinu he says I'm nothing, and then sometimes the Torah says that he's like Avram. That's called a mountain. V'harim lashon rabim, and there's different types of mountains. Yesh b'chinas har, yesh ava b'simcha, yesh b'meriris. There's different types of expressions of love. Even the passion has a passion of joy, and then there's the passion. There's excitement that comes from bitterness. When a person's bitter, it creates. You realize you're bitter because of your lack of closeness to Hashem or your lack of the relationship with Hashem. That also is a passion. It ignites a desire towards Hashem because you're feeling distant. V'derech chlal, but he says in general, Harim, the mountain, Hainu Serusal Tata, that's an avoda, that's a service to God. V'chinas chaysim violet, where the stamp is going outwards, from below above, that we're expressing outwards, like a stamp that protrudes outwards. That's fire, going upwards. Because of the valleys, that's if our stamp of our avodah is going inwards. You're going inwards, you're mevatel yourself, you nullify yourself. That comes from a place of fear. You make yourself secondary. It's not about you. Because lashon rabim. So why do we say there's different types of valleys? It says in plural. There's different types of fear of God. There's lower fear. There's the fear of sin. The fear of disconnect. There's the fear of awe. The four names of God represent the four letters of the name of God represent the chilui, which is fear, rachimoy, which is love. A second level of love is rachimoy, and techila, and another level of fear. There's different types of love and different types of fear. Harbeis ba'amim rachimoy, two times of love. Beis ba'am techila, and two times of fear. Maybe this is what it means. Mountains plural and valleys plural. Beis b'chinas harim, beis b'chinas b'kais. Two types of mountains, two types of valleys. But the point that Alter Rebbe is saying over here is that we have different types of way we serve Hashem. We have the way we serve Hashem is either we're protruding outwards. And actually, in Avram, he says at the end he's going to come back to Avram that it's going to be that the mountain of Avram is because he's a valley. Sometimes the mountain is the mountain of self-interest, and sometimes the mountain is because you nullify yourself. Means when a person nullifies themselves, it doesn't just mean you're bittul. It means that your options are much more, because when it's about you, so then it's about how much you're going to get out of it. So you always have to evaluate if this is worth my time, or this is worth what I'm looking for. If this experience that I want to have, what it yields for me. But when it's about bittul, it's not about you. It's about being a person of chesed. So then you're actually, in theory, you're the biggest mountain, because then you're able to do anything, because it's not about you. It's about being productive. So he continues. So when God responds to us, everything's responsive. So the way we act is how God responds. So the response, this Rusul Leila, means the awakening from above. That's a response to the way our avodah is Rusul Latata, an awakening from below. And if we're acting in a way of mayim, of water, Dotata, means we're creating a valley. It's a much greater response than God's response to us to our passion. If God's responding to us, His response to our humility is much greater than His response to our passion, our excitement. Again, both of them are in a way of serving God. But if you're protruding outwards, again, God is protruding inwards, so it's much limited. Where if you're going inwards, even though you create a small valley, but by definition, a valley is not about you, and therefore the flow that comes from Hashem is limitless. Because if the response, the avoda of a person that's protruding outwards, that's the fire, the eish, it causes God to go inward. When a person protrudes inwards, and you're bittul, you have nullification, then it's an awakening from Hashem, a response. How God is protruding outwards. And what does he say? What does this mean? The difference is that when God protrudes outwards, it's a gili or insaifli levush mamastirim. Then it's an expression of God's infinite being without any kind of garments that conceals. When God goes inwards, then it's a concealment. He's responding to us. You love how much you love. You're deciding how the relationship is. It's about your feelings. So God responds based on your feelings. If you're saying it's not about me, so I'm making space. So then you're making space, an infinite space for God. Like says there's no longer going to be garments that are hiding God. It talks about the days of Mashiach. If that's the case, when a person's avodah comes from the avodah of water, creating a space for the water, that means a person goes inwards, self-nullification. You make yourself like secondary. It's not about you. You're bringing an awakening from above, a response from above. Much greater. Much greater than if God's responding to your passion. The Rebbe says maybe one could say, and this is the idea of the mountains and the valleys. That if we create a valley, it creates a great mountain. And therefore, because it's so important, the bittul, the mayim versus the eish, therefore it's brought down in Medrash, I believe, 245. It's brought down in the Zohar that Arme Yaakov mayim liyayin, that Yaakov mixed water into the wine. What does it mean? He mixed water into the wine. Because he wanted a greater blessing, a greater response. Why? Because water, we're going to see in a second, water is bittul. That's chachma. We learned many times in Sukkot, Nisachamayim. Yayin creates an expression of simcha, of joy. Yayin hamasameach. Yayin causes joy. It has taste. So therefore, he wanted to water down the taste of the wine to make it more bittul. That's why the pasuk says, he answers the original question. Why does it say limtar, to the water? Say from that you drink from the water, not to the water. Because limtar shamayim tishtamayim. If you go towards the water, if you go towards the chesed, then you're going to have water. Like a person who gives water to his colleague, so the colleague should give back the water. Just give him. So if you're going to be bittul, then you're making space for the chesed of Hashem. And he says, Pirush, gives an example. This is an example of mayim nukvim lahamshach mayim duchen hanikrim tar shemayim. This is like the female who's trying to bring an awakening from the male. If the male is responding to the female, then it's called mitar shemayim, to the water, that the water comes downwards. And this is the idea also of the pouring of the water, like I said on Sukkot. That the pouring of the water on Sukkot was that we're trying to create we're trying to show to God that we're looking for a water relationship, not a fire relationship. On Kam Sukkot, the great time of Simcha. So therefore we pour the water of 7 days. And therefore from there we say, that's why on Shmini Atzeres, we say, Masha V'rucha Moed Geshem. The Kol Shiva Simei Hachag, the 7 days we pour the water. Because when it comes to pouring of the wines on the sacrifices, that's Simcha. And Simcha is expression. I'm happy. It comes from the place of fire. That's like me. It's like a stamp going outwards, protruding outwards. Shlemata. That's my avoda. It's a great thing. You're feeling love. You're happy for your love for God. But it's about your experience. That's why the Levites, they sang on when they poured the wine. Because Shira is also, and singing is happy. When you pour the water, that's higher than Bina. That's Chachma, which Chachma by definition is Bittul. You're going inwards, and therefore the great bracha of Sukkot comes from Nisach HaMayim. After page 22. And that's why that's why we say M'amar the Geshem. We talk about the water, that the water comes on, we bless the water, the rain on Shmini Atzeres. So that's the response. That if we make ourselves a valley, which is we show it by pouring the water, the 7 days of Sukkot, comes the 8th day. So that's the response of Hashem. That's the Ma'am Duchim, that's the male response, meaning the masculine, godly response to us. That the revelation of the infinite of God and now could be grasped by the Jewish people. Like when they have intimacy, so the seed is grasped by the female, and in a deep way. So when we have a bittul, we have a much stronger relationship than we have a passion. Passion fundamentally, again, it's an expression of your love for God. It's an expression of your desire for God. But it's all dictated according to your terms. I mean, it's dictated according to your terms. It's a reason God responds accordingly. God says, what kind of person are you? Are you a person that wants to define the relationship from your side? That's fine. It's fine by God. But then he has to go inwards. He has to make space for you. And then he's only responsive to your fire. Your fire dictates how the relationship is. But if it's not about you and you go inwards, then you're open to the most great relationship with Hashem. It may not have the fire component to it, but it's going to have the deep component of relationship. This is what it says, that if you're talking to the rain, towards the rain, then you're going to have water, you're going to have the chesed of Hashem. How do you get God to protrude outwards, the chesed to come downwards, which is on Shmini Atzeres, the final day, the 8th day of Sukkot, by us showing and pouring the water on the Chag of Sukkot. This is what it means that you give someone to drink so they should give you back. We pour water towards Hashem on 7 days of Sukkot, and then we say, M'amar the Geshem, God gives rain towards us. And this is what we understand that it says, and this is part of the 13 attributes of Micha, that it says it's connected, of course, to the beginning of Elul, the 13 attributes. It says, who's like God that could handle the sin, so to say, is a person, a person who places himself she'erus, secondary. In Rosh Hashanah, the Gemara says, the Pirish l'she'erus dainu l'misha me'esim atzmik k'shirayim. When you make yourself secondary, when you're mevatel yourself, you nullify yourself. So that creates a space for God. V'yesh levar, that there should be the abundance of the 13 attributes of mercy. V'yesh levar, he says, we could explain. Now we understand a bit why in the Kabbalistic writings initially, when they talked about the great attributes of God, they called them gagas. What's gagas mean? Gimel gimel taf. Gedula gevuret feres. Means they didn't use the term chesed for the concept of what we know as chesed as giving. They called it gedula, greatness. Hainu shemidas chazde yisbarach. This concept of God's giving, nikra b'shem gedula, was called greatness. Rak Beitz Chaim, only the Rizal from Beitz Chaim, the Reb Chaim Vital, Nisker, that's start to call Chagas. That's no longer Gagas. We didn't call Chesed. Gedula, we called Chesed Chesed. Shenikra Amida b'Shem Chesed. Pasuk Ksiv Gamkin l'cha Hashem Gedula. It's not just the Kabbalist. The verse also doesn't say the word Chesed. The verse that we say every day says l'cha Hashem Gedula. The greatness, it refers to kindness as greatness. Why? So why initially? And why is the verse referred to God's kindness as greatness. It's the same idea. Because when it comes to the infinite of Hashem, you can't limit it to the word chesed, rak machmas. The idea is not just the kindness. The idea is like when there's greatness, and there's greatness, the only thing is that the reason we call God's chesed, which is defined, is because we can't understand God's greatness. But greatness is the manifestation of expression. And the manifestation of expression is in the greatness of Hashem. And therefore, because we don't understand it, we say, what's great? Great is chesed, is kindness. God's in the king's face he wants to give life. Because he has a long way of giving, therefore the chesed is greatness. But the essential attribute of chesed by Hashem has no limit. But tachlis the chaz de atoy v'zeh midas v'rav chesed. This is an abundance of kindness. But this greatness of an abundance of kindness, that's only the way it is by the infinite of Hashem. That we can understand the greatness of God. God is beyond any understanding. He's before anything. He's above all things. Only by God we say a gedula is greatness. When it comes to people, we don't have that. We can't comprehend such a greatness. So therefore, we can't have any kind of relationship with that greatness, the level of greatness of Hashem. And therefore, any kindness that we do is like nothing. And that's why Avram Avinu said, "Anechi offer vefer." Why did Avram Avinu say, "I'm like nothing"? Because even though Avram Avinu's whole attribute was to be kind, but he recognized that his kindness is nothing to the greatness of Hashem, and therefore it created a humility. So if you connect with chesed, even though your chesed is acts of kindness, Avram did things. He hosted people. He did all kinds of acts of kindness. He was a machnas oirach. All the things of the concept of chesed of Avram, but it's all the way he recognized that it's nothing compared to the greatness of Hashem, and they created a humility in him. And therefore, what he wanted to do was that by him acting chesed, even if it's nothing compared to the greatness of Hashem, but he wants to meet God on his greatness, that the gedula, the greatness of God, meets the chesed of Avram. And therefore, when you protrude inwards, you never know how much you're going to receive from Hashem. You true out when you go outwards, then you're already creating a limitation. When things are on the side of holiness, is bechinas bittul. It's constantly nullification. You don't take pride. It's not about building your own image, your own ego. You don't feel like anything because it's the opposite of greatness, because you feel small, because you feel limited. As kind as you are, you're limited in your ability to be kind, not just because you're limited how much money you have to give, but even how much time you have and how much interest and how much if a person wanted to say, I'm a kind person, everyone has their limits, right? How kind could you be? How much could you give? Even if it's not just a matter of time, it's also a matter of you feel exhausted after a while. I mean, it's constantly giving. But God is constant, when you reach your limit, it creates a feeling of humility by yourself, because you say, look how limited I am and how kind I could be. Whereas in Hashem, God is limitless in his kindness and his greatness. Therefore, Eretz Yisrael, which is a land of kindness, it's called the land of Canaan, which Canaan means hachno bittul. The word Canaan also comes from the word to find humility within yourself, or lower yourself. Like it says, and v'zeu midas chesed Avram. This is why Avram feels small. Because he felt humble, therefore he created even more kindness. He's trying to do the max kindness, and even nevertheless he felt humble. That's why Yaakov says, I'm humbled by all God's kindnesses. So by that, we're talking about Avram. But why are we talking about Hashem? Eitz Chaim says Hashem talks about the midas of God as chesed. So if we're talking about what we explained until now, that a person's chesed is limited compared to the greatness of God. So God is gedula and a person's chesed. But we some that Eitz Chaim refers to God also as chesed. So he answers. So he says, because there's erech ampim and zer ampim. Before the tzimtzum, which is erech ampim, which is a large complexion, so therefore it's a massive expression of God's kindness, we call it gedula. But once there's already the tzimtzum in the world of atzilos, so then the chesed is already itself downgraded to zer ampim, to the small complexion of the world of atzilos, even though it's much greater than anything that we understand. But in the bigger picture, it's already, so to say, downgraded. At the end of the day, because there's vessels, in the world of Atzilus, and a vessel is defined by space and type. And therefore, the chesed is downgraded from its abundance in the world of beyond the world of Atzilus. Like it says, even if it says Reish Shlam and Devav Alofim, 236,000, tens of thousands of separations, whatever, it's a number. Any number is limited. Therefore, it's called the small complexion. The way God is before the tzimtzum, in the larger complexion, who's Ein Sof, then it's limitless. Therefore, it's called Gedula. Therefore, in the world of Zer Ampin is Nikra Chesed Dema. It's a Chesed of Bittul, even from Hashem. The vessels are nullified because they recognize that they're also limited in their expression of God's own kindness. But beyond the world of Atzilus, where it's an abundance of kindness, Rav Chesed, a lot of kindness, that's in a large complexion, higher than the world of Atzilus. As it says in the Zohar, that there's Chesed of Gav, Chesed of Var. There's a lower Chesed and a higher Chesed. So what he's explaining over here is that Hashem's Chesed has two levels. There's the beyond the world, which is a Gedol Chesed. It means, but what we're trying to say over here is what's this mean in our practical life? Practical life is what kind of relationship we want to have. If the more we define ourselves, is the more God is defined with us. So if the more we get out of our own space about ourselves, the more we are bittul, the more we never know what kind of relationship we're going to have. If we want to have a relationship with the Gdol Chesed, the abundance of kindness, beyond even the world of Atzilus, even the great world of Atzilus, which is much greater than our world, but nevertheless it's defined, it's called Chesed. If you want to have a relationship with Gedula, you must protrude inwards. You must just make space for God. Let God be infinite with you. So he says, but what happens? So the Kalim themselves, the vessels themselves, are limited. Therefore, the Chesed of Hashem is limited. But when the world of chaos, the vessels themselves can no longer contain the light, and the light left, and the vessels themselves broke into pieces like a broken vessel, right? If you have a vessel of water, a pitcher of water in glass, as long as the glass, the pitcher is whole, you have a pitcher and you have water. If the glass breaks, so the water is no longer contained, so the water goes away, and all you have is the broken pieces of glass. So that's called Shvir Sakelim. Shvir Sakelim, Shmoel Matayu, in the world of chaos, is Chesed Yishmo. Then becomes not just the Chesed of Atzilus, which is limited, but it becomes a Chesed of negativity. It means as long as you have in the world of Atzilus, you have the vessel, even if it's a limited amount of light, but it's a relationship. It's God being kind with positivity. But if you have the definition of Chesed, where you take away the light, the holiness of it, so then you have Chesed as the kindness, but has an agenda. It's no longer connected to holiness. And that's called the Chesed of Yishmael. Asher gam hu parzin, the Chesed of Yishmael also gives. There's an agenda. Why does he give? He gives to show how wealthy he is, or Tiferes Gudulosei, how great he is. People should acknowledge him. It means that there's an agenda, something about you. It furthers your own interest. The opposite of humility means the idea of the limited chesed should call out a level of humility in the person. Look how limited my chesed is compared to the greatness of God. But if you could take out the light, you're no longer connected to the greatness of God. So all it is kindness. And if it's kindness without a holy connection, it becomes just a tool of an agenda for your own interest. And therefore you don't have humility, you have actually ego from being kind. And it's not just Yishmael in a way of negativity. Plenty of people are doing acts of kindness. But at the end of the day is the fact that they need to be recognized, the fact that they need to be thanked and over-thanked, that's an expression of Chesed of Yishmael in a certain way. And that's the opposite of Avram, who was humble with his kindness. And therefore, fundamentally, what's the difference? The fundamental difference is, what are you ready to give? You're only ready to give extras. What's extras? Extras doesn't mean just that. It means even if you give more than the next person, let's say you both have $100. One gives 10, one gives 20. So you say, what do you mean I'm giving only the leftovers? Look at the next person, you only gave 10. Because you see in 20 more interest for yourself. One person only sees an interest up to 10. You see an interest for yourself up to 20. But at the end of the day, it's secondary, because it's all secondary to your agenda. Where did it come such an idea that a person has an agenda for chesed? That comes from the broken vessels that have chesed. but don't have the light. It once was great, but now it's broken. But a person has to work in the world of tikkun, which means chesed dema, the chesed of humility. Even if negativity comes to you from being kind, there's no agenda, there's no bottom line, there's no interest for yourself. It doesn't stop you from doing acts of kindness, because your whole connection to chesed, to kindness, is about your humility. It's not about you. Even the whole point of chesed by this person is you make yourself secondary. And only when a person creates within himself this avoda, that the chesed within yourself is a valley, is a bittul, then you are a vessel for God to reveal Allah the actual attributes of God, that the mamish, the greatness, the gedol chesed, the great chesed could be revealed within you from Hashem in a mamish, in an actual way. Because by you protruding inwards, by you having bittul, by you bittul, then God's response to that is he's expressive. Because you're not expressive, you're going inwards. Then it's God's greatness. But if it's on the other side, it's all about building up your image. And then you're connected only to the broken vessels. You're not making space for God. And that's why Rabbi Akiva said, so Rabbi Akiva says the famous story that the rabbis were walking in Rome and they looked at the destroyers of the temple, the destroyers of Jerusalem, the destroyers of Eretz Yisrael, and they said, look what kind of life they're living. Everything, they heard a big party. So they were depressed. It didn't sound good to them. And Rabbi Akiva said, what do you mean? If this is how it is to the Oivrei Ritzayne, those who go against God's wills, they're only dealing with the broken vessels. Imagine if you create a complete vessel, the Oiser Ritzayne, those who make God's will. Moshe has explained in other places, because when you have in the world of fixing, the world of bittul, you're a vessel to the completeness of the Hashem. And he says, maybe Shizeo Gamkin appears, this is what it means, Eretz HaOrmu, the land of valleys and mountains and valleys. Ki Avram shu bechinis har, this that we said before, that Avram is a mountain. This is now he explains it. But he said before, seemingly was a contradiction. First he said Avram is humility. Then he said Avram is a mountain. So which one is it? Is he a valley, a mountain? He says this is the whole point, that it's one land. You're one person. And when you create within yourself valleys, then you have mountains. If your mountains is coming from a valley, that's Avram. Because he was humble, he became a true mountain. Because then his expression is not about himself, his expression is about Hashem. Shehu b'chinis bittul, because he was a bittul, therefore he was a mountain. But on the negative side, it's just mountains, just an expression about yourself. And he the Alter Rebbe is kind of going back and forth a bit, because in the beginning, he talked about even in Avodas Hashem, that even in Avodas Hashem, on a high level, not Yishmal, not where it's an agenda, but even on a high level where it's Eish, where it's a mountain of fire, but nevertheless, it's still not you're not a complete vessel, because you're protruding outwards, God has to make space for you. And he finishes off the M'amar. This is why it says, again in the 13 attributes of Micha, that a person who makes themselves secondary, so then you become a valley, that valley could create a great mountain. The 13 attributes of mercy, they're called great levels of compassion. We're at the top, page 23. Like it says, that great compassion God is going to gather us in the time of the exile to the redemption. That this great compassion that God's going to have in the times of the redemption comes from God's great, in a non-understanding way of God's kindness. From the large complexion of the gedol chesed and abundance of kindness. You want to have a relationship with that great kindness, you have to be humble. You have to make yourself secondary. Which goes inwards and nullification. And you want to be a vessel to God expressing outwards, you have to be inwards. Mountains and valleys have to meet. So said the great and elevated. Where does the greatness of the holiness of God rest? The person who's humble. You want to know where the greatness of God is in the humility of a person. And therefore, we have to ask ourselves in our avodah. But like the pasuk says, we are a mountain of valleys, and we're a land of mountains and valleys. Sometimes we're mountains because we need to express ourselves. Sometimes we're mountains because we're valleys, and that's the avodah of ourselves that we have to go through and try to be more valleys than mountains, and then we're kind of in a healthy relationship and a vessel for God's great kindness. All right, everyone. Lila.